So you're working on this new feature in the front end and suddenly your app starts to break. You have no idea what's going on. You're pretty sure that your changes from the new feature are not really related to what happened. So you start to debug. You go into the code, you remove your own changes, you start to switch into other branches, you add a bunch of console logs, and after some while, you finally understand what happened. Somebody made a change to the API in the backend, and obviously your app won't work that way anymore. So what would help here is to have a contract in place. You might ask yourself, contract like in business? Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, a contract helps to set up some ground rules between two parties, and in this case we'll do it with a backend service and the frontend. So let's find out together how to add contracts to your projects so you won't be surprised in future anymore. Welcome to my channel, my name is Chris, and today I'm going to show you how to add contracts to your project. But before we get into that, let me set the stage first. I know it's easy if you're working alone on your project, if you're making changes to your backend, you immediately know what to fix in the frontend. But just imagine you're working in a bigger company and there's a frontend team you're working in and there's a backend team, and change to the APIs need to be communicated in one or another way. Sometimes it's a Slack message, sometimes it will be an email. There are meetings for that. Sometimes you have to look it up yourself in the documentation of the backend project. So with a contract in place, this process can be completely automated. But before we get to the contract, let me show you quickly the small project that I built yesterday. It's a frontend and a backend, and it's just for the purpose of emulating what it would look like and what could happen during a regular project. For that purpose, I went with SOA. It's a backend framework that is based on TypeScript. And for the front end, I went with Next.js. It really doesn't matter what kind of backend you're using or what front-end framework you're using. Contracts work almost everywhere. The important part is that you have the contract. And then there's a lot of tooling around it that will help you apply those contracts. Now, let me quickly show you the project I was building yesterday. It is a small app that is showing a list of users. They have an ID, a name, a status, they're happy or sad, and their user details if I click on each one of those. Nothing fancy, simple backend and the frontend. Let me quickly show you as well what the codebase looks like. Here is the project. We have the backend, which is SOA. I'll just show you the relevant parts. Don't worry about missing something. I'll put the link in the description to the Git repo so you can check it out yourself at your own pace. So we have here a model. So this is defining a user. So a user has an ID, an email, a name, a status, even phone numbers, which I didn't even show. I just took it from the demo setup for SOA. We have also a data set here, which is emulating the database. So we have 3 records here, Jane, Brian, and Alex, that you can see here. And then we have also a service that is responsible for fetching all those details, getting all the records, which is taking it just from the JSON, getting individual users, so you can show them here in the details. And we could even create users, but I won't cover that. And then of course we have a small controller that is providing the REST API endpoints, so we can fetch the users or the specific user by ID, or even create those records. That's it for the backend. And on the front-end side, it's as well quite simple. So we have here the types, which is basically a copy of the user model from the backend. So this is how most projects start off. They have basically a copy of the structures in the backend and the frontend. And we'll discuss about this a bit later. But here, as you can see, those are the same details for the user. We have as well a page where we display the user list and the details. If we look at the components here, we have the user list, which is iterating over the list of users and displaying them in the table. And then we have the user details that are displayed as a form. Then the important part here is for fetching the data. We have some hooks, and I'm using a React query. So we have the fetch user API call with Axios. We're going to /users, and then we have the fetch user by ID call with Axios, which is going to users /and the ID. And this is wrapped in the query functions from React query, so we can later on use it. Okay, so this is it. Don't worry, again, you can check it out on GitHub in full detail, and let's start finding out what can happen in a project. Now, I'm a backend developer on the project, and I got a new requirement from my PM. We have to change the model of the user. So instead of having just a name, we want to have now a first name and a last name. So easy as pie, I'll start coding. So first name and last name, and that's it. we have a change in the model. Now, obviously we have to change as well the dataset itself. As you can see, we still have the name here everywhere. So let's make it first name and here last name. So the dataset is updated. Let's check out as well the service itself. Well, for the user creation, this won't work anymore. So let's start with first name and last name here. So this should be satisfied. The controller should be working without issues. And yeah, well, let's find out what happens to the app. Oops, when I reload the page, I don't see the names anymore. Let's introduce even one more change to make it even more interesting. Status. We want to have more statuses than just happy and sad. Let's add sleepy. And of course we need demo data for that. So let's check out the demo data. And yeah, Alex will be the one that is sleepy here. And as you can check out here on this side, if I reload the page, the status for Alex, the third user, is not displayed anymore because we are only handling happy and sad in the front end. We check it out like here, the user status. You see we have happy and sad, and that's it. So I'm pretty sure that I notified somebody on the front end team on Slack, and well, nobody noticed it maybe. So how can we fix this? Let's talk about contracts. A contract is a technical document. It's a specification. It explains what the structure of an API is, and it helps two systems when they talk to each other to understand exactly what's the input and what's the output. And there are many forms of contracts out there, but what I want to focus on today is an HTTP API contract, and in this case it's OpenAPI. So let me quickly show you what it looks like. On the OpenAPI website, you will see a short explanation. The OpenAPI specification is a specification language for HTTP APIs that provides a standardized means to define your API to others. You can quickly discover how an API works, configure infrastructure, generate client code, and create test cases for your API. That's quite a mouthful. But as you can see already here, it allows you to do multiple things. It explains the structure. It allows you to generate client code, which I want to get into, and it even allows you to create test cases for your API. So there are many things happening with OpenAPI, and I think this is one of the best standards out there right now because it's one of the most well-known, and there's a lot of tooling around it, so it's easier to adapt it to your environment. Okay, so how do we get the contract now into our project? Let's check out the code base again. So we are here in the backend, and there's a good reason why I chose SOA. SOA has a built-in Swagger module or OpenAPI module, which means I don't really have to worry about building my OpenAPI contract. You can always create the contract manually by typing out the YAML specification or the JSON specification, but sometimes you're lucky and your framework already supports it out of the box. But yeah, let's check out what the generated contract looks like. Here in the build folder, I have a Swagger JSON, and the Swagger JSON is basically the whole contract. It's the definition of what the API looks like. So let's look at the controller side by side so we can see exactly what's going on here. Let's focus on this part. So we have a controller for users, and I can get all the users or just specific users by ID, or I can create new users. So if I look at this route, which means it's users / and user ID as a placeholder, I should be able to, yeah, actually, there it is. So here's the endpoint, which matches exactly user / user ID. It has a name, which will be later used in the client. It defines the response codes, what they could be like, so 200 most of the time. And it also shows us what the response will look like. There could be one response type, there could be multiple response types, but in this case it's only one response type. It's of schema user, and then we have also some parameters. And if you look at this, it should resemble exactly that part. So we have the user ID, which is part of the path. So here this user ID, and it's a number, so it's defined here. And then we have an optional parameter name, which is of type string, and this is here. And then if we look at the user definition itself, we have the ID, the email, first name, last name, status, and phone numbers, which is exactly the representation of the model that we have here. So it took all the details from the model and the controller and the input and the output and generated this Swagger JSON for me out of the box. So this is really useful if you have it built in your framework. If not, you can also type it manually down. Now, there's one more thing that I wanted to add regarding the contract definition itself. I think it's a really good practice if the backend and the frontend team sit together and define those contracts together, because there's sometimes good reasons for specific structures that are helpful to the frontend, and sometimes it's really helpful to the backend defined in a specific way. So it's good to talk about how the contract should look like, because both teams will have a win. So think about that. And now, without any further ado, let's jump into generation of the client so we can use the new API right away. What we will need for that is a tool that will help us transform that Swagger JSON into an API. And in this case, I went with Swagger TypeScript API, which is an open source project as well. It is one of many tools, but it works well for my case, so let's go with this. But make sure to check out others. There are plenty of them out there. So this Swagger TypeScript API will do two things for us. First of all, it will create types in TypeScript for us. So we'll be able to reuse, for example, the model from the generated API. And at the same time, it will generate a fetch or an access API. Okay, let's install it. Let's jump back to the IDE. Here we are. Let's install Swagger TypeScript API as a developer dependency because we won't need it during runtime. And let's run the API generation. So here I have something prepared already. This is my preference. It comes with some settings already. And this is something that you should check out in the documentation because there are different settings that might make sense for your project. So here's a whole list. Check them out, really useful things. Now, if we go back here, what am I doing here? So I'm running the generator with pointing to the Swagger JSON that is coming from the backend project in the build folder. So we're in the frontend project, but we're pointing to the Swagger JSON in the backend. And it doesn't matter if it's a JSON or if it's a YAML, and it really depends on your backend. And it doesn't even have to be a local file. It could be a URL that you provide here because there's a backend server running that you can point to. The generator will happily generate the API out of it anyway. Sometimes you will even use an NPM package to share between the backend team and the frontend team. So really up to you how you deliver this Swagger definition. You just need to point to it. And here then later on, I'm defining the place where I want to generate the file to, so Backend API TS in the source folder, and then additionally I want it to generate an Axios client. So you could go with a fetch client or with an access client, or you don't even have to specify any of those because you'll get types generated out and you can use those types to build your own client around it if you want to. So it's really up to your preference. And then, as mentioned before, I have already some preferences on how the API should be generated. Now, if I run this, it will generate the new client, the Backend API TS. Here it is. If we open it up, we can see already contract transformed into an API client. Now, we can see already here the user interface, which is coming from the model. Let's open up that side by side. Here it is. And yeah, if we look at it, it's exactly the email, first name, last name, ID, phone numbers, and the status. All of it is already here. So this gives us the benefit of not needing to manually copy over any types into a front-end project, but we'll be able to just reference them from the generated API client. And if we look further down, we should also see here the user slash, so here, the get user function. So we don't have to deal with the access call anymore ourselves. We get a nice function that will take an input for the user ID, an optional one for the name, and do the request for us. Good. Then what can we do as a first thing? Exactly, we can get rid of the manually typed model. Okay, let's find this out. Let's close this all up, and in our front-end project, there's the types. We can get rid of that because we can consume it now from the generated client. Okay, let's find out where we're using it. Before we can actually use it, we'll need to wire up the API, but let's focus on that later. So where do we have use? Oh, here's a user. So let's see. Perfect. We can apply it from here. Then in the user list, we don't use it. User status is using this. So again, let's import it from the Backend API. Perfect. Now we see already some problems here, which we'll deal with later. Do we have somewhere else as well? Yeah, of course, in all the hooks, we'll have the user type. So let's import it as well from the backend. And finally, in the page itself, we have for the state, the user ID, we reference the type as well. Okay, let's see how badly broken the page is. Okay, it's still running, which is a good thing. Yeah, let's find out if we can fix the first thing here. This is the status itself. So if we check out status, well, we're not handling all the cases, obviously. So what's missing here is we want to deal with sleepy. And for this, we want to, yeah, perfect icon. You see, got refreshed immediately and we have all the emojis handled. Okay, now how do we got the rest of things going here? Let's check out the user list. So in the user list, we should see some problems. Exactly. We don't have a name anymore as a property to the user, so we need to change that to first name. Okay, perfect. So now we have the first name showing up here, but this is not enough. We want to do more, so let's spit out a last name as well, and we'll need as well to extend the table so it has both first name and the last name. Perfect. First name, last name, everything's there. And let's fix as well those user details. In the user details, obviously this will not work as well. We need to provide an additional field. Right now we are covering only the names, so let's find out how we can reuse it. Let's put it like that. Name. No, that's too much. So first name. First name, which will be first name, and then I'm lazy, so let's do it like this. First name, we'll have the first name here, and then we need to duplicate this part, and instead of first, we'll have last. Perfect, cool. So we have the first name, the last name, and when we click around, it gets loaded and shows up correctly. Nice. What can we improve further? Remember when I said before that this tool will generate types and an API client for us? Exactly, this is what we want to do. We want to use the API client instead of our manual Axios calls. So in future, a lot of things will be automated for us. Okay, let's check out again the code base. And here's the Backend API. So before we start using the API client, I like to put a wrap around it because it helps to configure things and make it reusable. So let's call this API TS, and this will export a get backend API, and it takes no input and will return a new API, which is the import from the backend API. And as a default setting, I want to have a base URL, which is coming from our constants. Really depends on how you configure your project with environment variables or database settings, whatever it is. But here we just place the endpoint, so we don't have to redefine it every time when you do a call. And we can also define some headers that will be default, like content type application JSON is a nice one. Okay, so we have our get backend API, and now we can replace our old Axios calls in our hooks. Okay, let's open this. Again, here we have in the hooks the Axios call. Let's get rid of Axios altogether. And here you remember we had to define what the output will be. So in this case, it's an array of users and the endpoint URL, and here it's just a user. And this is manual typing. Why do we need to do that if we can do it simpler, right? So let's get the get backend API, and here you see already with TypeScript you get auto completion. In this case we want to go for the users controller, and here we have the get users, which is just a simple call, and yeah, we'll respond with the data from the response object. And the same goes for this one, where we say get backend API, and there we want to have the users controller again, and here I want to have just an individual user, so get user, and this will take as an input the user ID. So let's take the ID that we got, and that's it basically. And we already have a working front end with a generated API from the backend without any manual typing, without any manual Axios calls. Everything is in place. Now, what do you think about that? Pretty cool, right? So when we introduce a change now, we should be able to see how it breaks. back to the code. Let's go into the model again of the backend. So here we have the data, here's the user. Let's add a new status, angry. Let's say I want to have an angry user here, and let's update our data as well. Data, we need to have a new user, and in this case with the ID 4. Let's call him Tom. Tom is angry. Tom Jackson, and he will be angry. Phone number doesn't really matter, and let's reload the page. Obviously, this status doesn't work. Now, what needs to happen is the frontend needs to be made aware of a change of the contract. And there are multiple ways for that. You can automate it, or you can use NPM packages, or you can have whatever process you bring into your company. There has to be a moment where you're able to apply that new contract. So let's say the contract is exposed, and how do we refresh our generated API? We just have to rerun this piece of code again. We can actually automate this. So let's put this into our package.json in the front end, and let's call this generate backend API, an API client. Oh, you choose your name. Let's put this in here, and yeah, and for the dev mode, let's run this right away. So npm run dev, the client plus dev mode. So whenever we start the front end again, it will generate a new client for us and start the front end. So if we go back to the user status, we already can see an error. And in this case, it says that it did not deal with the status angry. Perfect. Then let's add the case angry in this case and return perfect. Let's look at the UI. It's there. Simple as pie. So I hope this was useful, and I hope you will apply it in your company, your project. It doesn't matter if the team is just 10 people, 2 people, you alone maybe, or it's a huge company. It's super useful because it will take away so much pain from manually copying over things, forgetting things. Communication will be simpler, and you will have a structure that will help you define exactly what is the input and what is the output, which simplifies a ton of issues and reduces time on debugging. As mentioned already in the beginning, I'll put a GitHub link somewhere down in the description, so you'll be able to check it out on your own and find out all the commands and how I applied the changes. And yeah, I think that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. This would really help my channel. And yeah, I hope I see you in the next video. And until then, I wish you bug-free code.